All right, fanatics, you know what time it is. This question relies on you to listen carefully. How many shows are in the Masters of the Universe franchise? A, 2, B, 4, C, 6, or D, 5,467,899? The right answer is obvious. If you get it right, you win a special prize. Now, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the So I'm a Fan of podcast, where people from different fandoms come together to share why they love what they love
and sometimes hate what they hate.
I'm your host, Kaiser Brown, and of course, today I'm joined by
the best co-host, Sabrina Gill.
So, Sabrina, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to be talking about the Masters of the Universe. Dun, dun, dun.
Let's get started. He-Man. I don't know. I forget how the He-Man theme song goes. I didn't forget. I was about to.
Oh, gosh. She-Ra.
That's all I can remember. She-Ra. That song's catchy though. It's kind of.
It was better than the He-Man.
You think everything better than He-Man? That's the problem, because I asked you to watch like an episode 2 of Masters of the Universe Revelation, and you looking on YouTube for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, it's not my fault.
Look, I'm just gonna let people know. Do I like She-Ra better than He-Man? Yes, but I am not a He-Man hater like Miss over here. She hates He-Man for some reason.
I'm sorry. I'll explain later. He's just so dramatic. It also might stem from my daddy issues, because my dad was obsessed with He-Man.
Yeah, it's probably some daddy issues. That's okay, but you can work that through therapy. Mention He-Man so you can understand, because I think He-Man's awesome. But we're gonna get into why I think He-Man's awesome in a little bit. So today we're talking about the Masters of the Universe franchise. Masters of the Universe. Sabrina, tell us what Masters of the Universe is from your knowledge.
Okay. So I guess before this experience at all of this episode coming up, I actually did not know of the Masters of the Universe. I knew of He-Man because, like I said, my dad liked him, and my dad has his whole like garage setup of tools and stuff, and he has all of his old action figures placed around. It's cool. Maybe I'll snap a picture before we have this episode air, and we can include a little shot. But it's cute, as like cringy as it is. But he had He-Man, he had the Green Tiger, he had some of the villains, of course, Skeletor, and he has them fighting over his tool bench, which I cringe. Honestly, something I would do, but not with He-Man. So he was the only one I knew about. And I just knew it was this very muscular man riding on a tiger through the world. And my dad was obsessed with it. That's all I knew. I was like, oh, that's a dad thing.
A muscular, shirtless man, though. See, you have to remember, 80s.
I just knew he was naked. He was naked riding through space.
Thundar. Yes, that's the best part of 80s cartoons to me.
No, I will say, I
think it's hilarious.
I had a phase with the newer Thundercats that came out in the early 2000s. That reboot that was done on, what was it? It wasn't Cartoon Network, was it?
It was Cartoon Network. Yeah. And then they had another one after that, 2017, but we don't talk about that one.
I don't watch that. Anyway,
for what it was, yeah. I'll give it that. What it was, it's not like you walked into it expecting something different.
Yeah,
some people did though.
Anyway, Masters of the Universe, but outside of that, I did not know much. However, post my somewhat little education I got from crash coursing videos from YouTube, those episodes you recommended to me, along with the Toys That Made Us episode, I did learn a little bit. Obviously, it's a collective of heroes under the franchise of Mattel that they had of like their action heroes, focusing around the universe of He-Man, and not only the villains that were created for that world, but also like just an overabundance of additional characters that were added over time to create this amalgamation of just various like good and evil doers who have these abilities that kind of fed into whatever the child at the time was desiring in like a good toy. So whether it's from moving parts, there was one that had the elephant trunk head that would squirt water. Some of them you would insert like scented pellets into that would make them smell, like the Stinkinator or whatever his name was. They were just It was people trying to sell toys towards the demographic of originally young boys, and of course they expanded with She-Ra aiming towards that 20% that was young girls. Whether or not that was good or bad is debated upon based on sales. I think it was a good idea because it offered an opportunity for girls to have more not domestically
Mhm.
based toys, which Barbie was starting to expand on that. She was starting to become into different job avenues and taking on various trips and adventures, but she could never actually have a true adventure of like femme fatale action adventure, which was very popular amongst those young children.
Mm,
That was like my favorite part about the research, I think, was seeing the balance of Mattel and the split between what was like Barbie and what became like the Masters of the Universe franchise, especially in what was done with She-Ra. I was intrigued by that because I guess as someone my age, I wasn't like big into like toys. I was a very much a go play outside with my siblings kind of person. And as I got older, I got into things like Pokemon and whatnot. But I feel like action figure wise, like my sister liked Barbie. I wasn't really into Barbie. I definitely liked Bratz, or as they came out, you got the more educational dolls that came with like science experiment kits and like
mm.
craft, if you will.
What was that one? They had
Um,
one Project MC Square or something like that.
yes, that came later though. That was like by the
Yeah,
time that we were like in high school, I think, like
yeah.
middle,
That's
like
the only thing
junior
one
high,
I
high
can think
school.
of. They always did have commercials about that. That's all I know.
Yes. But, like, having, I think, like, a more action-based figure might have been more enjoyable for someone of my group. Growing up with brothers, roughhousing with my brothers, they did have my dad's old action figures. I feel like being more exposed to more things like She-Ra might have been more encouraging, but, again, the debate about, "Oh, that's ruining the boys' fun because they don't think it's cool anymore because their sister's doing it," is dumb. But outside of that, I was excited to learn about Masters of the Universe, though I admit I came in very uneducated, and I still do not remember anybody's names except for He-Man, She-Ra. Their names will come to me. Tila, obviously, some of the stuff we had from Princesses of Power. But outside of that, I'm going in blind. People are coming back by descriptions. I got
You still need to watch Revelation and Revolution, I feel, because those are fun. Really good animation. And it has a huge focus on other characters in Masters of the Universe outside of just He-Man. But that's all I'll tell you right now. So, Masters of the Universe is a media franchise created by Mattel, with the focal premise of the franchise revolving around a war between He-Man and his alter ego, Prince Adam, and his arch nemesis, Skeletor, who fights to become the master of the universe, starting with the planet Eternia. The franchise has a vast lineup supporting characters, such as the captain of the Royal Guard, Tila, and the troll and magic user, Orko, who fights alongside He-Man to protect their home. The setting of Eternia combines medieval sword and sorcery and sci-fi technology. A follow-up series, She-Ra, Princess of Power, revolves around He-Man's long-lost twin sister, She-Ra, the alter ego of Princess Adora, and her rebellion against the Horde on the planet Eternia. The franchise has spawned a variety of products, including multiple lines of action figures, of course, 6 animated television shows, several comic book series, video games, books, magazines, a daily newspaper comic strip, and 2 feature films, one being animated and the other being live action. At the very onset of its creation, Masters of the Universe was usually placed with its focus on 2 characters: the blonde, muscular He-Man and the scrawny skeleton, because he's not even scrawny. That's a lie. That's a lie. He's not scrawny at all. I just thought about it. Skeletor. He's a sorcerer. He's blue skin. So like he doesn't have a face. That's why he's Skeletor. His face is a
yeah.
skeleton. And it focused on the many moral theme encounters on a planet Eternia. Eternia is a place where magic and machines exist and is split into 2 parts: light, ruled by King Randor, Queen Marlena, and Prince Adam, and darkness, ruled by Skeletor. I want to ask you a question. He-Man, I think, is one of the first examples of that's successful, focusing on both magic and technology. What do you think about the world of Eternia and Etheria, just like the whole Masters of the Universe wide line doing that, putting both of them together? Because a lot of times you see either one or the other.
So I like the idea, especially since I'm like a firm believer that there are some spaces in which like science and like the world that we have now, like our world, is almost like as crazy as magic. What is making potions other than mixing various chemicals in a vial, which is done in a lab. So I feel like people see them as, like, opposite ends of a spectrum, like, it's either black or it's white, and it's not. There's definitely, like, this amalgamation of, like, gray and various it's almost like a what do they call that? A Venn diagram.
Mhm.
Like, they definitely are 2 circles that intersect with each other, and so I definitely enjoy that part. I also enjoy, like, the idea of keep in mind, again, I've seen very little of this, but I like the idea that it's like this contrasting sides, like, you see what is more of He-Man's side and Masters in the Universe on that end being very much magically driven. They're very much, like, more fantastical, at least from what I've seen
Mhm.
watching the 2 episodes I did, whereas, like, Skeletor and the Horde, they're definitely more rooted in technology, this idea of change in a world that you wanna rely on nature more, which is what I think Adora and Adam are, like, representing. They're representing nature, they're representing humanity and, like, natural, which is deemed more closely to fantasy, whereas you see then Skeletor, the Horde. Again, technology, a sense of change that's disturbing that natural essence. So I think, like, the
Mhm.
genres should be mixed up more, personally. I like again, I get future sci-fi, they tend to think it separates too much, but there are plenty instances where I think fantasy and sci-fi can live together. Especially, we see, like, Dungeons& and Dragons is, like, a perfect, like battleground for that, like, the clash of, like, science and fantasy. And then I think isn't there's Warhammer? I'm not as familiar with that, but I feel like
Yeah.
that too offers a similar space of what's this role-playing and tabletop kind of style gaming that encourages a more, like, you build your world. But yeah, I don't know. I like to think that science is its own magic, and you
Hmm.
see that too in different shows, like Winx Club. There's Techna, like,
They
her whole
yeah.
shtick is, like, the use of technology and the like,
The whole thing
fantastical.
about Winx Club is, like, they live in a technological advanced world that's way more advanced than, like, Earth. Like,
Yeah,
Magic City, they have flying cars and everything that runs off
yeah.
technology.
I enjoy it a
Mm.
lot, a lot.
He-Man's main goal is to prevent Skeletor from conquering Eternia and discovering the secrets of Castle Grayskull, which according to the wiki is a mysterious ancient fortress with a skull-shaped facade containing great power and magic. Because this is a franchise with varying amounts of media from animation to even comics, there are several story differences between the various versions of the Masters of the Universe franchise. But for the sake of this podcast, we will be discussing the franchise as a whole, which means everything. We're touching a little bit on everything today, you guys. It's important to note, though, that in most continuities of Masters of the Universe, from the Filmation series onward, you have the same type of premise and story. He-Man, the alter ego of Prince Adam, the son of King Randor and Queen Merlina, who is the ruling family of Eternia, holds the sword of power, utters the words, "By the power of Grayskull!" Has a magical girl
That's
sequence, becomes the hero, He-Man, who serves as the protector of good on Eternia. Do you think He-Man's a magical girl? I think so.
yes. I the moment I
Uh-huh.
saw the transformation sequence, you sent me the one from the newer show of him and,
Mhm.
Tila transforming, but I didn't need that. I knew in this first one, especially with him as Adam in
Mhm.
that pink coat, I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be a
Yeah,
magical girl."
yeah.
I was like, "Oh, that pink coat. Oh, he lifts his sword." I was like, "Well, magical girl.
Mhm.
Where are his ribbons?"
Yes. His abilities are given to him by the extremely powerful and extremely cool magic user known as the Sorceress of Castle Grayskull, who is the mystic guardian of the castle despite being unable to leave it. Adam's cowardly green tiger Cringer also transforms by the power of Grayskull into the giant armored beast Battlecat, with the two often being depicted as a duo. He-Man has
Mhm.
a whole list of allies, but his most prominent ones include Man-at-Arms, a wise, loyal veteran soldier and inventor, and his adopted daughter, Tila, a spirited and skillful female warrior, often portrayed as the captain of the Eternian Royal Guard and a potential love interest for He-Man/Prince Adam. The childlike trolling magic user, Orko, who often features as one of He-Man's closest allies. If you ever played Final Fantasy, he reminds me of a black mage. That's what he reminds me of, Orko. Black Mage before the Black Mage came out. Because I know they came around the same time in the 80s, but I think Final Fantasy was like the late 80s.
But yeah, if you ever seen a
Mhm.
black mage, that's who Orko looks like.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I thought the
Mhm,
same thing when I watched that episode. I was like, "This
mhm,
looks really familiar," and
mhm.
I remembered.
And also Stratos, who's a flying bird man from the kingdom of Avion. And you have Ram Man, Many Faces, a whole bunch of weird, fantastical characters, which are actually really funny. The type of characters they put in He-Man and She-Ra, and then how they
They're really
go.
like they're like dad jokes. They're
Yeah,
like plays on words.
in
It's
both shows too. Both shows. It's not just one. It's both of them. They're all just
they're
like
not
on the nose and just like hey, you already
it's so
know.
cringe. It's
But
that little.
that's the charm of Masters of the Universe. Okay,
You're not wrong. It fits.
yeah. So the franchise was released in stores in 1982, and it was bigger than all the other toys in the market, and was one of the first time toys started before the cartoon and not the other way around. At this time, Mattel was based in Hawthorne, California, which was this around 1979. It was the 70s. And they dominated toys, but they hardly had any action figures and had the opportunity to create like Star Wars figures, but they turned them down. And
No.
one of their former employees took it to the toy company Kenner, and then they made the Star Wars toys. And they regretted it after that. So they tried and failed several times to do something of their own with making action figures, but it wasn't until later that they finally struck gold. Joe Morrison, Mark Ellis, and a few other people got a bunch of 5-year-olds and watched them play with toys. In other words, they got children from market research. And apparently, a common theme was that the little boys wanted power. And a lot of these landed on the spaces of army men, barbarian fantasies, like those fantastical stories. So they eventually took these ideas, sat down, and came up with a bunch of themes, eventually deciding that the barbarian theme was the best one for the job. Now, according
Mhm.
to some sources, Roger Sweets, let me say that because I say his name fast. Roger Sweets, so we can give you credit, Roger, came up with a big idea and wanted to do something well, big. And he wanted to get bigger because he was always skinny. And so he created a very bulky figure. He put it in a battle action pose and gave him an angry expression, and then created two other characters called Bullet Head and Tank Head. The first character that he created, if you didn't guess, was He-Man. He then presented it to Ray Wagner, who was like the president of
Mm.
Mattel at the time, and Ray Wagner, apparently to Rogers, according to Roger Sweet, said, "Those have the power," but very quietly. Those have the power. So the actual designs of the figures, though, according to a few other sources, was by Mark Taylor. Mark Taylor, we're giving you your flowers too. I'm giving everybody their flowers because we're gonna get into why. Who he took inspiration from Frank Frazetta, who was an artist that was mainly known to use themes such as fantasy and science. He took that inspiration and created He-Man and the Masters of the Universe aesthetically. And then
Mhm.
Taylor says that the origins of the idea came from when he was a child. Why I'm saying a lot of these names and then putting emphasis on these names, Mark Ellis and stuff like that, is because many people who worked for Mattel at the time and worked on He-Man take credit for creating the character and the line as a whole. It's more of a team effort,
Yeah.
but everybody did do their things like in the origin space that kind of added to the character. So that's why a lot of them feel like they created it.
Yeah. It's like the whole debate because in reality, when a toy comes out, they don't say like the name, if you will, of the designer, the artist, whoever. They just say the name of the company that's releasing the toy. So, like in this case,
Mhm.
everybody was like, "Oh, He-Man is being released by Mattel. It's not by this man here who's sitting in an office doing whatever." Because the reality of it is, like,
Mhm.
much as you can argue that, oh yes, this person came up with the original idea of He-Man, but like that's not how He-Man looks. So it's also this person actually, like you said, aesthetically designed He-Man, and it's just it's like an amalgamation of people who contribute various characteristics to these, like, end products, and so, of course, that like, creates arguments about who truly created the character, but at the end of the day, it's a team effort. There's nothing original really in this world, is there?
No, not anymore. But just remember, everyone played an important role, okay? Everyone. You too. former employee at Mattel who worked in the Barbie division.
Yeah. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you for creating He-Man, because if you didn't create He-Man, we wouldn't have the character and such amazing cartoons and toys. In order to create the toy line, though, they needed 8 figures, so Mark Taylor created several characters. These characters were He-Man, Merman, Stratos, Teela, Zodak, Man-at-Arms, Beastman, and, of course, Skeletor. Oh, did I do a good Skeletor voice? Nah, it wasn't that
Oh,
good.
totally.
Yeah, Skeletor. I don't know how I forgot how Skeletor sounds, so I'm just gonna be quiet. I'm gonna leave that to Mark Hamill. So Skeletor represents fear. That was the whole thing about Skeletor. Apparently, there was like this whole story where like one of the creators went to a carnival as a kid and a skeleton dropped out of
Yeah.
the sky, and that inspired them to create the character later on.
It was a real dead body.
It was
Like,
a real
so I saw a clip. So part of
I think
my
it was
research
Mark
was
Taylor.
the toys that made us.
Mhm.
Yes. So he said he went to a carnival as a kid and he walked up in this haunted house and something dropped from the ceiling and it was a skeleton, but he said he could tell from the smell that it was a real person. It was a real dead person. And it was like he said 60 years later, he was like thinking about it and he looked it up and it was an actual news article that someone had gone missing in the haunted house and was found hung in the building. So like
Jesus.
this whole traumatic experience he had as a kid like fueled what is like now this popular media symbol, whether it's from the actual show of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe or if it's just like memes. Like it's crazy. It's nightmare fuel.
Wow. Wow. The strangest ideas come from the strangest places. That's all I'll tell you. They also created the Castle Grayskull to have a place for the figures to go into. Although at first the door wasn't big enough, so they had to resculpt it.
Yeah.
They also had a lot of vehicles too and an animal companion. By this time, they ran out of tooling money to create the animal companion. And one of the creators decided that they had some separate tools from this line called Big Jim. And so he chose a tiger and brought it to Tony. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, who was a sculptor. We're going to call him Tony. Paul brought it to Tony. And Paul was like, give He-Man this animal companion. And Tony was like, but it's too big. And Paul was like, I don't care. And Tony took the tiger, painted it green, put a saddle on it, and it became Battle Cat. And that's how He-Man Battle Cat companion came to be. They eventually realized, though, that He-Man wasn't a strong enough name to carry the line, so they came up with the name Lords of Power, but the higher-ups thought that it was too religious. So that's when they came up with the name Masters of the Universe. But it seems nobody liked it, the name Masters of the Universe, for a variety of reasons. And one of them being that they thought it was too long of a name or something like that. But I think Masters of the Universe is much cooler than Lords of Power.
I like it too. I like the name. I get where they come from because it's like they were looking for that one quick punch, like He-Man or She-Ra. They were looking for a quick bam. But Masters of the Universe is definitely a mouthful, which is where they were coming from. They were like, what kid is going to be like, Mom, I want a Masters of the Universe? If you're 5, no, you're not.
Apparently millions of them, because it worked. So as they continue to develop, as they continue to develop the line, it was now time to present it to investors such as Child World. Child World at the time was the second largest toy retailer in the U.S. after Toys R Us. And so
R.I.P.
said
R.I.P. Toys R Us.
They're back. Toys R Us is back.
They were dead. Is it the same as before? Probably not.
Not, but they're back. Anyways, so Child World brought up a nice question. And they said, Star Wars has a movie. What do you got? Mark Ellis immediately lied to them, saying that they had a comic book, but that wasn't a lie for long, because they decided that each toy in the line was going to be shipped with mini comics accompanying them that detailed the line, the lore, the characters that they were being based off of. Originally, He-Man was a wandering barbarian from a jungle tribe on Eternia who set out to save the world. Eternia dealt with the aftermath of a great war that devastated once powerful civilizations, leaving behind their fantastical machinery and weapons. The events of the war led to there being a rift opening between the dimensions, which allowed the evil Skeletor to travel to Eternia. The sorceress gives He-Man special powers, armor, and weapons as a way to fight Skeletor alongside his allies Teela, Man-at-Arms, Battlecat, and Stratos. He-Man and Skeletor both had a half of the Sword of Power, which when united, opened the castle of Grayskull. And whoever gained control of said castle would become the master of the universe. During this time, He-Man's alter ego, Prince Adam, did not exist, and not all of his supporting cast were there, or as we know them as they are now as well. So the figures were developed to be 5.5 inches, which is 5.5 inches, which were bigger than the often used 4-inch figures. It was different, and apparently kids loved it. They promised the company, Mattel, that they were going to make $13 million, but by the end of the year, they made $32 to $38 million. So somewhere in between.
I want to make that money.
Different things. Me too. Especially when you adjust them for inflation. That's billions of dollars when you consider how He-Man was, because it was in the millions then.
So
Adjust for
good.
inflation, because it's funny because how we talk about movies now. The reason they do not adjust for inflation for movies now, like if you're talking about past movies, is because if you do that and you look at the amount of money that those movies made, you will see that they far outweigh the amount of money that movies make now. Even movies like the $2 billion Club and stuff like that. So that's why they're like, oh yeah, this movie made $388 million. When in all actuality, it's like billions of dollars. So inflation is real, you guys. Money has way less value than it did way back in the day. A few weeks later, they presented the line to Toys R Us, who asked them a vital question. What was the question? Sabrina, what do you think the question Toys R Us asked them?
I know what they asked.
What
Do you want me to
Go ahead. Do a voice.
Okay. So they said, because on the actual box for the toys, it was for 5 and up or like for 5-year-olds is what like the main demographic was. And Toys R Us was like, why are you including this comic book? Because I don't know about you, but what 5-year-old is reading a comic book? And that's when the man was like, oh, but wait, did you hear about the 2 1-hour specials we'll be having a week? And of course, that was another thing he just pulled straight from his butt, and in the heat of the moment trying to get the deal, which in that moment, it was really smart of him because, of course, from there, the first thing he did was go to Filmation and was like, hey, I got this idea for this show. We got to go. It's happening. And
Mark
off to the races it went.
He just let it flap out, and it worked out in the end. So, and let me say this, in the past, Mattel did have a cartoon that was based on toys called, you probably never heard of it, Hot Wheels, but the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, received complaints that they were just like commercials. They weren't actual cartoons. Those were toy commercials. And so they thought it wasn't healthy for children to be exposed to commercialism like that. And so for many years, toy companies were not able to promote their brands when it came to cartoons, like actual cartoons, like in maybe in a commercial, whatever, like you draw a commercial, but actual cartoons for children to watch, no. But eventually they became more lenient on that in the 80s and so on and so forth, to now we can have cartoons that are toy commercials. Maybe not as much as they did back then, but cartoons, in order to make money, a lot of them still. So at first, they pitched the series to programs such as ABC, CBS, and NBC, the big three, but they declined. And so, not to back themselves into a corner, they partnered with the kings of the Saturday morning cartoons, or the secondary kings. I don't know. Who do you consider the king of Saturday morning cartoons? Filmation or Hanna-Barbera?
I don't know. I wasn't allowed to watch TV.
Oh my gosh.
Like I would stay up really late to go sneak and watch Gargoyles and Power Rangers at night.
Oh my
That's all I
gosh.
got. I ain't got nothing else because there was no Saturday morning cartoons. I was kicked outside.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. I stayed inside. That's where I live. Okay, so Filmation was run by Lou Scheimer, and they had a 1981 series called Black Star, which caught Mattel's eye. That's why they went to Filmation to animate. And Lou suggested that for the same amount of money that they wanted to use to create those 2 hour-long specials, they could create an entire syndicated show. So this is a quote that I got from, it's a Wikipedia quote, of course. You guys don't trust Wikipedia, but I trusted Wikipedia because I looked at different sources and I felt this was true. Mattel hired because I looked at the different sources. So Mattel hired screenwriter Michael Harpern, who was experienced in live action TV, to do Pitch Bible, which was submitted in December 1st, 1982, to flesh out the backstory both for merchandising and for the cartoon. It introduced He-Man's alter ego Prince Adam, as well as the planet Eternia, Queen Marlena's origin, who apparently is from Earth, among others. Unfortunately, it was not considered viable, so the Bible was reworked by Filmation staff writer Tom Ruegger, having already developed Black Star alongside similar lines. Most of the character designs were handled by Herb Hazelton. When they finished the first 10 minutes, they invited Mark Ellis and a few people to come see the show. And they were amazed because they took all the random stuff that they put in the crap in the toys and stuff, and they actually made it make sense in a cohesive story and world. And I'm amazed how, looking at the old cartoon, I'm actually quite amazed at how they were able to make it cohesive. Because a lot of those toys were just stuff they called it like the kitchen sink, where they were just throwing ideas in there.
Yes.
I'm amazed at how they were actually able to create something that was cohesive and like characters that they stand the test of time. You know what I mean? And even today, when you have He-Man, it was a toy commercial, but like He-Man stuff now, they have quite a few examples since it's been around for so many decades where you can actually create compelling stories with that type of stuff. So I find that very interesting. I think it says the success of just like how, not that we should create toys just to sell cartoons, but maybe some of the best ideas come from toys to sell cartoons when
It's
it
not
comes
even just
to
that.
characters.
I think the idea of having, of course, at the end of the day, it's marketing,
Mhm.
but like having a really good toy and then having a
Mhm.
really good show that like allows in a sense, the character in that like 2D world to step out of that world is just so amazing. Like, prime example, as I got older, my sister loved Monster High dolls. Like, I liked them too. I wasn't like a collector like she was, but she was deadly in love with Monster High dolls, and it's because when companies put a lot of effort into these kinds of, like, toys, like, they almost become like sculptures, like, they're their own works of art.
Mhm.
And yeah, they're meant for children, but at the same time, like we'll talk about probably later, like there's just a great portion of these fandoms and communities of like people who enjoy this media that it surpasses childhood. The love of He-Man exceeds like youthful generation and has grown with its
Mhm.
original generation. And like adults now who watched He-Man back in the 80s are probably like the biggest fans of He-Man.
Adults
Like the
now
biggest.
are the creators of a lot of the stuff now too. Like, it's just interesting
Yes.
how the stuff that you look at that you loved when you were younger are the things that inspire you to do the things that you do in the future. How many people now create toys because of He-Man, are now working animation because of He-Man, are now working Hollywood or this, that, and the other because of a cartoon that they watched when they were children. So I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
importance. The show came out in September of 1983. And it was on all the time, on weekdays, weekends, mornings, and after school. It was on all day. He-Man was on all day. It's like one of those instances when we talk about cartoons, we talk about how cartoons were mostly at the time on Saturday mornings. But
Mhm.
you also had your cartoons like He-Man, which were syndicated, which means since they were syndicated, they would come on every day. You will have a new episode every day of He-Man because you want to get it out as much as you can, hence syndication. So He-Man had 130 episodes. In that time frame of just a few years, they burnt through those episodes real fast. And then they played reruns of those episodes while She-Ra was having new episodes. It all made sense. We're going to talk about some syndicated shows later in another episode, but
Mm.
I just find that interesting because a lot of times we talk about those cartoons of that era and talking about how they're only on Saturday mornings and this, that, and the other. But then you have shows like He-Man and She-Ra, G.I. Joe, Transformers. Those weren't just Saturday morning cartoons. Those were on every day, all the time. And I think that's where like the start of cartoons being like more than just a weekend father came to existence. So the show had to be a bit brighter than what the toys were due to it being a cartoon. Of course, they couldn't, it was the 80s, they couldn't be so dark. And that makes it perfectly 80s too, because 80s was, when it came to TV, was like very bright. That's when Prince Adam came into the picture. He made pink cool, I guess. Without the cartoon, He-Man would have never lasted as long as it did. And according to this quote, despite the limited animation techniques that were used to produce the series, He-Man was notable for breaking the boundaries of censorship that had severely restricted the narrative scope of children's TV programming in the 1970s. For the first time since Ruby Spears' Thundar the Barbarian, which was a show I watched when I was little, a cartoon series could feature a muscular superhero who was actually allowed to hit people, although he more typically used wrestling-style moves rather than actually punching enemies. Though he still could not use his sword often. More often than not, He-Man opted to pick up his opponents and toss them away rather than hit them. The cartoon was controversial in that it was produced in connection with marketing a line of toys. Advertising to children was itself controversial during that period. Do you think it's controversial to use TV shows to advertise toys to children?
So, okay, as a whole, it can seem very harmless. Oh, what a kid's gonna do? They ain't got adult money. Like, it's not like they're gonna go grab, like, at that time, I'm sure they weren't thinking, oh, yeah, they're gonna go grab your credit card out your purse. And next thing you know, they're buying stuff on pay per view and through the TV. But I understand the concern. I understand the realistics behind it of the idea that these kids are being, in a sense, preyed on by corporations that are encouraging them, like in a sense peer pressuring them and using various techniques to be like, oh, you need this toy, or else you're not like the rest, you're not up to the where everybody else is, you don't have power like He-Man.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, to an extent, like, parents say no. I don't know about your parents, but if I got all upset that I couldn't get the toy on the television, it was tough stuff. Like, you're on your own, kid. You
I
gonna go work?
mean, if I was throwing a tantrum about toys, I would have got a butt whipping, first of all.
I
But
know.
second of all,
Like, my parents never hit me, but my dad, if your full government name or your middle name was said, you
eh,
better
my
put that
mama didn't
lip
even have to do
away.
that. My mama just have to look at me, just have to look at it. She would just look, and we already knew. Don't act up. She look at us now sometimes. You be wondering, wait, did I do something wrong, mom? What that? You like, wait. I'm like, I'm 25. My sister 30. My other sister 24. And if she just look at us, I'm like, did we do something wrong? And sometimes that's just how she look. And that's how I get my looks from. Sometimes I just look at you. I'm just like, and it's not a meme. It's just how we look. But that's how it worked on us. And I just wasted water everywhere. But I do think it is brilliant, though, using cartoons as a
Yeah.
way to cash in on the dollars. That's
It's like a
commercialism
very
at its
smart
finest.
marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It's really smart, but at the same time, I get the moral ethics of it. I get
Mm-hmm.
the concern of economically of this idea of that you're using children in a sense to get to their parents. And we can say it's not bad, it's just toys. But when it starts pulling in other forms of media too, like, not to get dark, but like the idea of like during times of like war and propaganda, like these kinds of techniques can still be used on children. And it opens an avenue that it can be used in less savory manners. So I get why there was like
Mm-hmm.
this whole idea of cracking down on those kind of like ads and experiences, because media has a very important power. A topic of power, but media has a very strong hold on society, especially like youths, adults too, but youths especially, being in a very malleable stage of their lives. They are
Mm-hmm.
the most,
TV
what do you
affects
call
me
it?
sometimes. Vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. No, trust me, I'm the same way.
Mm.
I'm a sucker. I'm a real sucker sometimes. Imagining, like, my niece, oh my gosh, I told my mom, I said, like, she has this one lady she loves on YouTube, Miss Rachel. That is her favorite family member, the only person my niece cares about. My niece just turned 1, and the only person she loves and cares for in this world is Miss Rachel. But I said she will not become an iPad kid. My niece, She don't need to be attached to no screen. She's already in our family. She's already lacking a couple brain cells and is already on her way to the loony bin with our genetics.
Oh,
She don't
so
need no more help. She don't need no more help. She
on to the next part, because that's so. In order to combat this, they put life lessons with morals such as don't do drugs and be kind at the end of episodes. I find it really funny because people be complaining about cartoons or whatever. Not that you shouldn't tell kids not to do drugs, but a lot of cartoons in like the 80s and the 90s really did have those drug storylines and telling kids like not to do drugs, don't play with guns, don't set yourself on fire. You wouldn't have that on the TV show nowadays for kids, like a cartoon.
I like the idea. I like the
Mhm,
idea of the moral lesson,
mhm,
or if they, performed something or did something in the show that could be questionable to be done outside of, obviously this fantasy, setting. So I didn't mind it. I actually thought it was a little cute, at the end of the episode that I did watch, to have that little lesson at the end.
mhm,
But I like it to be, very story tailored specific.
mhm. Yeah, so,
Like
when they did
oh,
it for, like, He-Man stuff, they tried to make sure the moral was directly tied into the central theme of that episode, so it made more sense. A lot of shows did that at that time too, though. I found that really interesting. We don't do that with shows now. Even Static Shock had a storyline where a kid had a gun. Captain Planet had a storyline where Linka's cousin became a drug addict and then overdosed and died at the end of the episode.
and you said my family being crazy, it was a bad story. And, being crazy and stupid is a bad thought, and you're sitting over here like such and such family member became a drug addict.
That's the character on TV. Don't. I thought I was like, wow, because I remember the cousin because a whole bunch of teens got overdosed, and the cousin was trying to get the drugs, and they just fell on the floor. I should be laughing because it's that good, but maybe it's
Can't with
like a
you right now.
dramatic
I can't with
response
you.
of what
Can't with you.
10-year-old cousin saw. I loved Captain Planet when I was younger, but like that episode was crazy. To Prince Adam and like his pink vestness. What I liked about Prince Adam, like his persona, is that he was like very feminine while He-Man was like still a superhero. Like I feel like it showed that like you can be like a feminine, you can have your feminine qualities and embrace your femininity as a male and still be like showing that you have the power. What do you think about Prince Adam? Because I feel like they do the opposite with She-Ra. She still has like her feminine qualities, but she's like really more outgoing. When it comes to Prince Adam, he's a bit more emotional, I should say. What do you feel about that?
So I actually really like that part, especially in the show. That was like a big point that was made in, I believe, the Toys That Made Us video, was that they made the comment that in the show, up until this point, before getting the context of the show, He-Man was very much this barbarian who just was fierce and whatnot. And having Adam made him more human, more personable. It also allowed for a contrast because you could argue that He-Man before then was like a little meathead, but Adam was sensitive, he was a little emotional, and I liked the idea. The only thing I wish that would may have been conveyed a little more in his action figure, still maintaining the muscularness, but maybe including, like, some more qualities from, maybe more, I say, feminine directed
Mhm,
toys, because they had that 20%. Maybe instead of going, full doll with, She-Ra, they could have done a little bit more of a transitional toy that still had the fierceness of, an action figure while still having a more, feminine appearance. Because they had the Adam toy, but I felt like it did not look like him inside the show. I was like, "Dude, this was, a real burly, angry version of Adam." I didn't feel like it was, his,
he's like
cute little
angry,
softness
yeah.
type.
It's
Um,
weird because
I
like,
like
I watched He-Man, it's funny because going and watching Masters of the Universe, like the newer shows, how he's smaller as Prince Adam, but then watching the original show, how he's still bulky and muscular as Prince Adam. I find it hilarious how nobody recognized that he was He-Man because they look exactly alike.
it's like Superman. Man just whips off the glasses.
Yeah, but at least with Superman, the thing about him, Clark Kent usually like changes like his how he presents himself, his demeanor. He will slouch over a
I guess
little
you're
bit.
right.
He would change his hair. I would still look at you and be like, but you could look different enough. You can make yourself look different enough to fool people that you're a different person. Prince Adam just put on some tights. He put on more clothes, basically, and this is what
Yeah.
happened.
So that's almost again, I haven't seen the newer show, but instead of changing physically, like the idea of size, I would have liked to have seen that change in demeanor
Uh-huh.
instead of like
Uh-huh.
necessarily like the physical change of getting bigger. Because I hate the idea of being like a man can't necessarily be feminine and be like muscular and
See, the
burly.
thing, he wasn't like scrawny or anything. He was still muscular. He was just
Oh, okay.
smaller. He was just like smaller. So he was still muscular. He still looked like someone that worked out, but he wasn't like super tall, like 6 feet or seven
Mm,
feet, 8 feet tall, however tall He Man is. You know what I mean? He was muscular, but
yeah,
He Man was muscular. He Man was the barbarian. Prince Adam was the gym geek type of thing. The gym geek. He didn't know
yeah.
how to
So
fight. He pretends to not know how to fight, but I'm like, where you got those muscles from? But I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I like
Mm,
it. I like Adam. He should
mhm,
stay. He could stay.
mhm. This was the first time, because of the show, that boys' toy line ended up outselling the girls' toy line in Mattel because Barbie is number one. She rules all to this
Mhm.
day. So he wasn't really happy about that. The show had a 2-season run from September 1983 to November 1985 and consisted of 130 episodes, 65 episodes each season, due to it being developed for a weekday syndication. And the cast included John Irwin, Alan Oppenheimer, Lou Scheimer, Linda Gary, George Licencio, and Erica Scheimer. He-Man has a myriad of abilities, which I will list now. Not as much as She-Ra, so I won't be going on a very long list, but they basically share the same things: superhuman strength, reflexes, super breath, enhanced speed and agility, suggested telepathy and clone generation, and with his famous catchphrase, "By the power of Grayskull," he is able to turn into the super being He-Man. He usually can stay He-Man as long as he wants, unless he takes too much damage or uses too much of his raw power. And unlike his sister She-Ra, his sword is indestructible. It doesn't have a little jewel there, so it could be. I'm not gonna say too much. He doesn't have his sword doesn't have that weakness that Adora's has, which I think balances out the scale a little bit since she has so many abilities with her
Mhm.
things. But it's also due to him being the earlier character. So like when you have the newer character, which I think is pretty cool, Adora having more abilities, you're gonna have to give them more abilities because you know what I mean? You need to sell your
Mhm.
toys. But the thing about Masters of the Universe was that 20% or 30%, because different sources say different things, of He-Man's audience were girls. They watched the show and they bought the toys. So what could Mattel do to get that audience of girls to buy even more toys? Do you have any ideas?
Shira, sorry, cough. Oh, no. What would they do, Kaiser?
Oh my gosh. They decided to create She-Ra, the Princess of Power. She
Oh
had
my
the
gosh,
action
she nailed
moves,
her.
but also clothes and hair. So she had everything. She had the flowy hair. She could punch you, kick you. She had it all. Real action hero. And she was the same size as him, although they actually wanted to make her bigger at first, but the boys weren't having that because they wanted to make her like Barbie doll size. The boys were not having that because it will make her
Mhm.
look more powerful than He-Man. Which I guess is true. I guess to a child, I guess she would look more powerful, her being taller. She-Ra was introduced in He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword, and she ended up getting her own TV show, which was based on Etheria. And both of the characters within the franchise still exist to this day. If you want to learn more about She-Ra, listen to our previous 2 episodes focusing on her character. It's a two-parter. You'll
Woo.
love it. It's great. He-Man also became an international phenomenon with video games dominating foreign markets. And by this point, though, once She-Ra came, they ended up oversaturating the market before She-Ra came, actually, because she came into the building was already beginning to fall. They called it the kitchen sink for a reason because one of the employees of Filmation asked what they were smoking when they were looking at all the characters they created because you had
Yeah.
stuff like Merman, Evil Lyn, which is actually a really cool character. I love Evil Lyn. Hole's Nose, Too Bad. A lot of these toys had their own gimmicks, such as like one of the bad guys having 2 heads, and then when you pulled one arm, it will punch the opposite face. Like a lot of gimmicks but it was too many gimmicky toys. Like, they just kept coming. And so by 1986, they made $400 million, but it collapsed at $7 million. So that makes you wonder what happened. Sabrina, ask the question.
What happened, Kaiser?
Oh my gosh. So David Capper blamed She-Ra for demasculizing He-Man. Apparently, they got research that if brothers were playing with He-Man and all of a sudden their sisters were screaming, I got the power too, it was less cool, which I think is a very ridiculous notion. But another theory, which is way more plausible, says that the tertiary characters were a bit too much and you didn't have enough of the bigger characters. So when new kids came to buy the toys, they couldn't start their collection appropriately with like the biggest ones, He-Man, Skeletor, Tila. You had Merman or Many Faces or Too Bad, and these characters aren't as important. These aren't the big characters, so that affects your revenue because
Wasn't that part of the supply issue too? This
Mhm.
idea that I don't necessarily know toy market how that worked back in the day, but if I remember correctly, they spoke on the topic of how they would be creating this brand new side character that honestly probably shows up once or twice, but by the time they finished producing that one toy, they were like, "Oh, hey, where's that reorder of He-Man and Skeletor?" But they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, so we'll get on that, but here's this whole shelf worth of this one side character that half the
Yeah.
kids are not gonna necessarily wanna buy."
Yeah, they did though have one more ace up their sleeve, which was the Masters of the Universe motion picture that came out in August of 1987. Yeah, Courtney Cox was in it. Apparently, they didn't have enough money to afford the movie, the toys, or the people working on it. So a lot of human elements were removed and they were replaced with like new characters. And they also sent him to, like, a modern Earth. So it's not good, but apparently it's a cult classic nowadays. Does that make it good? No, but that makes it a cult classic, and some people enjoy
Was
it.
debated as to whether or not they drew on his muscles. Like, they were like, "Oh, he worked out a little, but he wasn't He-Man big, so they decided to draw him in."
Like, how big he wanna be? I thought he looked great. So, like, how much bigger do you have to be? He gotta look. So it features Dolph Lundgren, Frank Langella, John Cypher, Chelsea Field, Billy Barty, Courtney Cox from Friends, Rob, because it's the only one I know besides Dolph Lundgren, Robert Duncan McNeil. Oh, and Meg Foster. Meg Foster was in this movie for real? Okay, so the film tells the story of two teenagers who meet He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, and his friends, who arrive on Earth by chance from their home planet of Eternia and go on a mission to save the universe from their enemies, Evil Lyn and Skeletor. I will say that some of the characters actually did look cool, but a lot of characters did not. Anyway, that's all you really need to know about that. Prices dropped on the toys. Roger Sweet was removed from the line, and then they closed the line altogether. And then at that time, they were also planning on developing another line called The Power of Grayskull, which was going to explore like the distant past of Eternia called Preternia. They released a few toys in that line, such as Turbodactyl, Titus, and Megator, but they didn't really go through with it, right? They stopped it.
Yeah.
There were some cool concepts with it though, because there was like this wizard named Hero, who was a wizard and ancestor of He-Man, who a lot of characters that they planned on using this line did end up returning later, and they did end up making toys for them, just not
Mhm.
for the Power of Grayskull line because that line was canceled. And a lot of them do appear in like different He-Man cartoons, especially in Masters of the Universe Revelation. They pull out a whole bunch of characters for that show. And in that, I think in that show, he's voiced by Phil Lamar, who is a very famous voice actor. In 1989, they tried to bring the brand back with new characters and more clothes. That was their first mistake. And it was followed by an animated series in 1990 called The New Adventures of He-Man. It made changes such as being almost purely science fiction, so removing a lot of the magical side of He-Man. And He-Man was transported to the futuristic planet of Primus or Primus. I never watched the show, so I don't know how it's pronounced. Touting a ponytail and wearing more clothes, like I said. Boo.
Boo.
Remove the tights. He leads the
Where's
Galactic
my Prince
Guardians
Adam?
again. He leads the Galactic Guardians against Skeletor, Flog, and his band of evil mutants on the planet of Denebria. It was intended to be a continuation of the original series, but only a few characters in the original series appear in this continuity, that being the Sorceress, He-Man, and Skeletor. It included several new characters such as Flipshot, Hydron, Kaio, Artilla, Flog, Slushhead, Butthead. Like, that's the what? Quake, and the Tech Mutants. The series lasted only for one season with 65 episodes and actually had closure. Unlike the original series, it had a sense of closure, like the storyline ended. But it was a mistake. The toy line and its characters weren't nearly as popular as the originals, and the line quickly ended in 1992. The series wouldn't see any new major releases until 12 years later in 2002, where they tried again with a better cartoon, which was still unsuccessful due to the toy line, despite it being surprisingly faithful to the original Masters of the Universe toy line without radically reinterpreting it. And it was really popular with collectors, but children weren't really buying the toys. That's literally it. Like, adults loved it, children didn't. Children watched the cartoons, didn't buy the toys. Story of a cartoon's life. The show was called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It lasted for 2 seasons and 39 episodes, aired on Cartoon Network's Toonami on August 16th, 2002 to January 10th, 2004, which is weird because I don't remember the show at all. I learned
I don't
about it
either.
years later, but I was watching Toonami at the time. Teen Titans was on around this time, like in 2003 and stuff. I remember those shows, Dragon Ball Z. But I realized there are
Yeah.
a lot of Toonami shows that I didn't remember because maybe I was probably too young to remember a lot of them. This probably was one of those shows. Like, the shows that really stood out are shows that stood out. But I hear that this show is actually really good. It's like the Thundercats of the He-Man,
Yeah.
reboot wise. So the continuity was much tighter and the story featured more mature themes. According to Wikipedia, a similar but slightly modified premise of the original Filmation series, this version of He-Man was part of an ensemble of Eternian heroes / protectors known officially as the Masters of the Universe. Under the leadership of Man-at-Arms, this team originally consisted of He-Man / Prince Adam, who with his pet Cringer / Battle Cat. Cringer wasn't able to speak anymore, which is weird because I like that the cat can speak. It makes him unique. Tila, Orko, Stratos, Ram Man, Mechanic, Many Faces, and later joined by Buzz Off, Roboto, Cyclone, King Randor, who was now a general rather than a king from an Eternian royal lineage, who ended up being pronounced ruler of Eternia by the elders of the Hall of Wisdom, which have gone into hiding inside the depths of Castle Grayskull. Skeletor was now confirmed as Randor's brother, Keldor, which is something they continue with the line, them being secretly brothers. And he finally breaks through the Great Barrier Wall after decades of trying and attacks the Masters with his evil forces, mainly consistent, of course, Evil Lyn, Beastman, Merman, Trapjaw, who is now a cybernetically repaired henchman, formerly known as Cronus, Triclops, now an inventor / scientist, like somewhat akin to an evil man-at-arms, Clawful, Whiplash, etc. Too many names. Really, just too many names. Backstories of occasional characters were like introduced and all expanded upon. And then you had on and off villains such as Count Marzo, the Evil Seed, new characters such as Decker, Carnivus. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of characters. Like, a lot of the summary from like these He-Man shows is just like a lot of characters. But apparently the show was good, so I might watch it one day. It eventually was retitled though to Masters of the Universe versus the Snake Man when King Hiss became the primary antagonist of the show. You know when shows have those gimmicks where the new villain comes in, and so you have more toys to sell with new armor and this, that, and the other, yada.
Yeah.
The show featured voice talents such as Kim Clark, Mark Akeson, Kathleen Barr, which is a big name, Lisa Ann Neely, Don Brown, Gary Chalk, Brian Dobson, Paul Dobson, Michael Donovan, Brian Drummond, Mark Gibbon, Christopher Judge, which we all know as who's he? The God of War, Kratos. Gabe, Cotham, Scott McNeil, Colin Murdoch, Richard Newman, Nicole Oliver, and John Payne.
Mhm.
Woof. Basically, because the adults, this franchise survives. Okay. The grown-up 5-year-olds, they're high-end toys. They're the reasons why this franchise continued going. They are the reasons because they love the show when they were older. They buy the toys. They introduce it to their kids. Love it now. So literally, the shows didn't really do anything, but the people who love the stuff did. And besides that, until recently, the series has continued through comics, mainly from DC, who published new stories up until a few years ago. At the time of this recording, there is a live action film being worked on with Kyle Allen cast as He-Man. I do not know who that is, but he's an actor. It was originally supposed to be Noah Centineo from, what did he play on Kissing Booth or something? Or To All the Boys. Noah Centineo. I think it was To All the
Yeah.
Boys. Yeah. Yeah. And so, just the original story of the series is now being continued on Netflix with Masters of the Universe Revelation and its sequel Revolution, which are actually really good shows. Skeletor's final assault on Castle Grayskull caused his demise, put an end to He-Man and damaged the source of all magic in existence. After their battle fractured Eternia, Teela must solve the mystery of the missing Sword of Power to prevent the end of the universe, and her journey will uncover the secrets of Grayskull at last. That's Revelation, and Revolutions is following He-Man's return and Teela now assuming the mantle of the Sorceress of Castle Grayskull, because I'm just giving all the spoilers. Skeletor seeks revenge after being corrupted with a technological virus created by his master, Hordak. With his newfound power, Skeletor resumes his revenge on Eternals under the guise of his previous identity, Keldor, while Teela emphasizes her duties as a sorceress by bringing the overworld afterlife of Preternia back after its destruction from Evil Lyn. Okay. The show features a variety of voice talents such as Chris Wood, Susan Eisenberg, who voices Wonder Woman in a lot of media, Sarah Michelle Gellar. Everybody knows who Sarah Michelle Gellar is. Melissa Benoist, Tiffany Smith, Mark Hamill, among others. In the same year as the release of Masters of the Universe Revelation, a CGI animated series called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe also premiered on Netflix. So by this time, you had 3 Masters of the Universe shows going on at the same time, I believe, at one point. Masters of the Universe, He-Man and Masters of the Universe, and She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. None of them took place in the same continuity. That's a lot. And all of them, I hear, are actually good. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe basically is what She-Ra is, but more aimed at boys or whatever. It's CGI. It stars Yuri Lowenthal, Kimberly Brooks, Julie Alice Lee, Roger Craig Smith, and of course the late and great Kevin Conroy, among others. The description of the show reads, there's a lot of descriptions I'm just like reading down at the end of this episode. And it's basically the same thing, if I'm being honest. On a planet Eternia, an amnesiac Prince Adam has been separated from his father, King Randor, during the treachery of his uncle, Keldor. Upon being part of a tiger tribe with his best friend, Christine, Prince Adam later finds a power sword that transforms him into He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. With Cringer, Christine, and their new allies, Teela and Duncan, known as Man-at-Arms, they work to fight the forces of Keldor upon his transformation into the evil Skeletor and his minions, Evil Lyn, Beastman, and Trapjaw. I need some more to y'all because I just been reading a lot of descriptions.
Okay,
I think it's
I
funny in
feel
this
that.
one. He-Man, his design is like so upper body heavy, and he has the skinniest little legs in the CGI show.
Dude, he
It's
mislaid there. He mislaid there.
very top heavy. Okay. The Masters of the Universe franchise is also big within the comic medium, like I said previously, with DC Comics being the first to publish a series starting in 1982. This is before the show came out, 1982. This is when the line first started, with DC Comics Presents issue number 47. Here, he even has a crossover with Superman in the beginning of the run. And according to the wiki, this version of Adam was originally depicted wearing a blue vest and portrayed as somewhat of a philanderer rather than his later more wholesome pink vest wearing character. He also transforms with the Cavern of Power instead of the power of Grayskull, and the sorceress being referred to as the goddess. A lot of characters and storylines were introduced here for the first time than within the toy line. From 1985 to 1988, Marvel Comics also published stories taking place in the Filmation continuity, so it took place in the cartoon world, and it had newspaper strips, a 13-issue series, and fan club magazines. There are a variety of comic publishers besides Marvel and DC who have published original comics, with the most notable actually being the ones produced by Egmont's London Editions in the UK, as they are known for their in-depth expansion of the series and lore. They go really into it. You love world building, they will give you the world building and the characters and the stories. Like, it's this whole thing. Like, it's a lot. It lasted for years with the UK comics. Image Comics and MV Creations in 2002, Dark Horse Comics, and of course DC Comics again within recent years from like 2008 to 2020 have all produced comics for the Masters of the Universe line. And there are also tons of video games within the series, such as Masters of the Universe, The Power of He-Man in 1983, Masters of the Universe, The Super Adventure in 1986, Masters of the Universe, the arcade game in 1987, Masters of the Universe, the movie in 1987, He-Man, The Power of Grayskull in 2002, He-Man, Defender of Grayskull in 2005, He-Man, The Most Powerful Game in the Universe in 2012, and He-Man, Tappers of Grayskull. And that's the end of the lesson.
And we're back, fanatics. We revealed this answer earlier in the episode. Do you remember? How many shows are in the Masters of the Universe franchise? A, 2, B, 4, C, 6, or D, that long number that I will not say again. If you guessed C, 6, then you are correct. That means that you were actually listening. And your prize is the gratification of knowing that you got it correct. Now, back to the episode.
Oh my gosh. Sabrina, did you think that He-Man would be so a lot? Masters of the Universe in general?
So it's called Masters of the Universe, so I anticipated a bit, but for it to all just pertain about this one man who barely wears any clothes is really well.
Like, how do you feel about the brand now that you learned so much about He-Man and the sorts? Stripping for y'all.
Ooh, so I definitely had like a whole newfound respect. Like I said, I used to like, we all have the things we're nerdy about, and He-Man was always like the thing for my dad with his little action figures. So I used to pick on him about it, or I didn't think they were cool because, you know, it's my dad. Like, my dad can't be cool. But like now I have like newfound respect for that. And I also am somewhat intrigued by the universe. Obviously, it's, I say dated in the sense that it's, the show itself was from a long time ago, and we're a little spoiled now with how like far we've come advanced wise and like animation and storytelling. But I definitely think they have their own charm, and I like definitely appreciate them a lot more. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
At the
I
very
think
least.
Master of the Universe has done a good thing with staying with the time. So like, even though like you have the old cartoon, if that's not for you, you have a variety to choose from
Yeah.
with He-Man and She-Ra in general. So if you want something more serious, you can watch Masters of the Universe Revelation or the other shows, you know what I mean? If you want like something that's not as long, you can pick something. So He-Man really is a franchise that is a franchise. That's all I can tell you. It's a franchise. And I think that is really cool. Out of the facts that you learned today, what do you think is the most interesting that you really like about this franchise?
Just the franchise or the topic of like the storyline of like He-Man?
Either one. It can be within the story or not.
So I think I like the idea of like the journey I think that He-Man has come on. I like, out of everything I watched, as cute as the show was, and like I say cringy, like as like humorous, like very dad jokey-ish and dramatic that the show was, I think like my favorite part was when I watched The Toys That Made Us and like getting that like behind the scenes perspective and like watching as like this new form, if you will, like this new avenue, a spark of what was like these bulkier, like barbarian-esque, like muscly people became like the forefront of what was like boys' toys and like what it takes to make that happen. Like the perspective of like it's not just all these people sitting in an office being like which toy will be put out onto the market. It's like all these people that come together, like it's artists, it's fans, it's everybody coming together. And then at the end you made the comment about how it's the old 5-year-olds who saw it all those years ago in the 80s that are now like full grown adults teaching their kids, and that's what's keeping them alive, not necessarily all these shows. It's the adults buying these same figurines and toys. We're
The
all the way from the
brand
80s.
alive, I should say. Yeah.
And I think you said that, and all I could think of is, am I the one paying the bills for the creator of Cardcaptor Sakura and Kobato? Am I the one?
You are. Anime is real known for selling them toys for the cards.
Oh
They
gosh,
real known
I don't
for
want to
that.
admit what I paid for some figurines.
Mhm.
But it's just, it was funny. It was like the full circle. Not only the story of He-Man, that's interesting in of itself. I am a little more biased towards She-Ra because my favorite still to right now, at least having seen Masters of the Universe and She-Ra, I still enjoy that newest series of She-Ra Princesses of Power. And I like still obviously it's my favorite, but it was interesting to see the other perspective because I'll admit I was like hardcore team She-Ra. I was like, He-Man could go sit in the corner, Adam can wipe his little tears off the ground, whatever you want to do, he can go kick rocks, team She-Ra all the way. The reality of it is he's kind of grown on me, sadly.
Yeah. And
I get
yeah,
it.
without He-Man, you wouldn't have She-Ra. So you wouldn't have a
You're
wonderful
right.
character in She-Ra too. You know what I mean? Because if they didn't recognize that girls were buying those toys, you wouldn't have that female character to look up to. And I really do like. I love the idea of just like long lost twins. It's one of my favorite tropes. It's just like a male twin and a female twin and long lost and stuff like that. I love those type of stuff.
Like, I was gonna judge you, but then I was like, oh dang, wait, never mind. I can't judge nobody. I got my tropes.
Well, guys, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode, learning about He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you have fun. And I hope that you have the power. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the newest episode of the So I'm a Fan of podcast.
Don't forget to support us by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so that we can reach out to as many people as we can.
And you can view our socials at IAFO Fans on X, formerly known as Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Reddit.
And our merch at iafofans.com. We have lots of exciting things in store for you, so come and listen to us next time. See you, fellow fanatics.